to them, to bring them under subjection. And it was during the reign of Jehoiachin, who was really, you had a couple of other kings in there that were pretty short. It was what's his name? Jehoiachin, and what was the other one? Jehoahaz, who were all did evil. But just keep Jehoiachin in mind here, because he is one of those taken into captivity. Now, the best and the brightest, the royal family. So apparently Daniel was part of this royal family that was taken into captivity. And if you look at, share with you in Daniel, first of all, let's read Isaiah 39:57. It says, "Then said Isaiah," now this is 150 years prior to the captivity, 150 years, and Isaiah says to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days come that all in thine house, in that which thy fathers have laid up in store until this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall be they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." This is Isaiah saying this. Now we go down to Daniel 1:1, and it says that in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into the hands with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, into the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of God. So if you go back and read into 2 Kings, it talks about all the things that he took. It gets sort of specific there. And it also talks about really Jehoiakim is disposed of, and Jehoiachin is placed in position, but he doesn't last long. He's carried into captivity into Babylon, and and spends the rest of his days there as the king. Morning, Sister Simmons. So the question is asked, now how are these related? How are these two related? Isaiah's is prophesying, right? And in Daniel is being fulfilled. Now, what other prophecy can you think of that Isaiah mentions that stands out? I think it's in Isaiah 53. He talks about the crucifixion, isn't it? So while you're looking up that, says that Daniel, whose name means God is my judge, was marched from a defeated Jerusalem to the Babylonian capital. Now this is over quite a distance. This was, it probably took him a month or so to make that journey on foot. And they are, remember, these are the best and the brightest, and they're led into exile, and then they're placed into, Babylonian University for their course of study, and which they had to learn, Just picture yourself being taken to a foreign land and then having to learn their culture, their language, their laws, all of that they. And not only did they learn the language of the Chaldeans, but there was also Persians. There was also the Egyptian language. All these things they had to learn, and they stood out far and above the others. But we find that Nebuchadnezzar is concerned about making sure that they have the best of everything. So we come down to Daniel 1:8-13, and could someone just maybe relate to what happens there with regards to diet, or share what you read there? So do you believe that diet is important? Okay. Well, is it important to God? Okay. Very good. Very good answer. Yeah, that the original diet that was at creation was fruits, nuts, and grains. This is what Daniel was accustomed to doing, and that we were told that the diets of the Babylonians, especially in the upper court, was heavy in meat, and all kinds of spicy foods and things like that, which was considered a delicacy. It was a privilege to eat at the king's table. Here they're refusing. But I read in 2 Kings 25:29, we're talking about Jehoiakim, who is now taken into captivity. He says, and he changed his prison garments, and he did eat bread continually before him all the days of his life. Meant that he compromised. He ate of the king's food because he was a king and he was treated as a royalty, and so he ate from Nebuchadnezzar's table as a captive. Now, this probably presented problems for Daniel, and so it does for folks in the church, where you have you can only have one real standard, not two sets of standards. Well, if you have God's standard and you have man's. Now, you can see the problem that sometimes we can face in the church when you have certain members doing one thing and others doing something else, and the world observing this and say, okay, now this is what Adventists, we know what Adventists do. I can remember, well, I won't get into that, but if you're known by people know what you're supposed to be about, and if you vary from that, then it raises questions and it presents problems for others who are trying to hold to the standards. But Daniel, now I'm sure that there were hundreds of folk taken into captivity, but only 4 are mentioned here. Daniel and his three companions, because they stood out. And they're an example for you and I today when we face certain situations, how are we to behave? Through the power of God, we talk about he and his companions rose above the normal captive status to become highly placed missionaries to two superpowers. This is Daniel. It also paints a beautiful picture of men who learn to live out their commitment to truth in the absence of the temple, the priesthood, and sacrifices. That's when you find yourself removed from your familiar surroundings, your support system. Your church here, this is our support system. We should be looking out for each other, helping each other to grow spiritually. I said, but when we're off by ourselves, where no one is watching, no one is looking, how do we behave? Pardon? Well, I'm speaking of, we look at, the angels and God are always see you. But, when we're, pardon? What? Oh, yeah, okay, well. Okay. And that's indicated here in the lesson today. That when you, I should have put it a different way. When you think no one sees you, how do you behave? Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sure. So you could say with Daniel and his companions, they were acting the way they've always acted. So it didn't matter if they were in church or down the street someplace surrounded by a bunch of heathens. Their behavior was always going to be consistent, right, with the Word of God. Okay. In the providence of God, these men were taken captive that they might carry to the heathen nations the knowledge of the true God, that they might take the knowledge of the true God. So they're taken as prisoners. What important insights can you glean from this passage about the treatment given to these prisoners of war? What can you glean from that? We already talked about it. I mean, that they were given the best of foods according to Babylonian standards, right? Okay. So they were treated by today's standards pretty well. However, who was their overseer? What was his title? He was captain of what? The eunuchs. So you know what a eunuch is, don't you? So they had to undergo some pain there. A eunuch meant that they would no longer be able to have children of their own. They were essentially castrated. So that was. Pardon? Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I did say that the best looking. Okay. Mm-hmm. They were what? Converted, okay. As we see. Mm-hmm. You will act in harmony with God's will. Mm-hmm. And these are young men, okay? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, do you think 10 days can change your appearance?
Well, it shows sometimes God operates in a. It's funny how we don't take that as a miracle or as a hand of God. We think it will be either he raised an experimental exercise. And it works.
Well, I often thought that also that, they had made this journey. They probably didn't get good food on the way. They probably looked pretty haggard, when they got there. And then to go back to the original diet, boom, which they had already had that foundation, it restored them right away. Of course, God worked his miracle working powers there to make sure because of their faithfulness. And I honor you. Okay, good. Mm-hmm. So you can say that the characteristics of a good, faithful missionary would be found in Daniel 1:8-20. We talk about the diet. Now, someone read Daniel 3:8-18. Daniel 3:8-18. We're talking about the idol here. We're talking about characteristics of a good, faithful missionary, one that does what God asks him to do, allows the will of God to lead out in his life. So you have that, brother? So this is a very strong testimony here. Well, first of all, let's look at this image. You remember the image of Daniel 2 dealt with 4 different types of metals, right? Gold, silver, brass, and iron. And of course, the feet of iron and clay. And Nebuchadnezzar knows who the head is. It represents Babylon. But he creates an image of all gold, that saying that he's going to be everlasting. But you see that apparently this had been going on for a while, because it had been observed that these young men weren't bowing to this golden image. And there is jealousy there from the Chaldeans, because these young men have been probably promoted into positions over them. And so now it's a chance for them to get even. And Nebuchadnezzar gives them an opportunity. He calls them in. Now, there's investment here on his part. They have gone to the University of Babylon. They have graduated at the top of their class, and they've been instrumental in giving good service to the government. So there's a plus there for Nebuchadnezzar. Now, he's got a problem here, because it's been brought to his attention that they're not following the dictates, and his people are putting pressure sort of on him. Hey, what are you going to do about this? But notice the strength of these 3 young men in saying that God is able to deliver them. So but if not, if he chooses not to deliver them, they're still not going to bow. How many of us would have that type of courage today? And according to the end of time prophecies, that prior to the end of time, a lot of us will have to go through that experience ourselves. Now, they were able to do this because all through their lives, they have not compromised. They have relied on the power of God. And so when they are confronted with this huge test of their loyalty, that they're able to stand firm. So if we cannot run with the footmen, how can we run with the horses?
True love casteth out fear. So
okay.
We have to love Christ.
Love Christ.
Otherwise, we're not going to be able to stand.
Okay, so
you can't stand for anybody you don't know or don't love.
Mm-hmm.
It's
So
impossible.
then what does Christ say about, if you love me, keep my commandments? So that's an indication for our love. So Daniel 1, 8 to 20 deals with diet. Daniel 3, 8 to 18 is this worship. We know that once they're thrown into the fiery furnace, which is heated 7 times 7, well, I don't know how they arrive at that, but that's what the Bible says, that Sister Simmons, yes. Sister Simmons, go ahead.
The Bible says what was written aforetime was written for our learning,
Mm-hmm.
from whom the end of the world comes.
Yeah.
So as I studied concerning Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and Esther, I thought about what the Lord says in the book Messages to Young People. Only those who would rather die than perform a wrong act
Mm-hmm.
will be found guilty.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
When I read that, I said, that reminded me of the Hebrew boys, commonly called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Oh, yeah.
Daniel and Esther. They would rather die than
That's where we have to come into play. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Only those who will never die, that perform a wrong act will be found.
So you hear that only we got to be willing to die, then perform a wronged act. So that comes with these little trials and tribulations that come our way. We have to take that same attitude, so that we're able to stand when we're faced with a real big. Yes, sir.
When you said the Daniel and the other three Hebrew boys, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, didn't compromise, what are you actually saying, and what does it say to us today?
Well,
What lesson are we supposed to learn or to get from that aspect of the lesson? They didn't compromise. What was it that they didn't compromise?
well, they didn't compromise in diet. They did not compromise in idol worship. And then we look at Daniel 6:4, 10 to 11, where Daniel, now this is years later. He's an older man, and years later, and he has witnessed the fall of Jerusalem, the fall of Babylon. He's now in